Do you ever wonder why every single lake with a boat launch has a sign warning against zebra mussels? Even as a small child, I've always been interested in animals and ecology. One of my favorite stories was about the reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone using wolves right here in Minnesota. I know that every one of you has either gone to or wanted to go to a national park. You probably also have wondered what makes a species invasive. The history of the national parks in the US are often overshadowed by histories that are more exciting, like ancient Egypt or Greece. But I believe that knowing the history of these beautiful places can lead to a greater knowledge and understanding of American history. The invasive species of these parks will be a part of the speech as well because knowing why the laws against them were put into place and how they impact the parks will make everyone much more mindful while they're outside. I will be covering the history of the national parks during 1832 to 1906 and 1907 to now, as well as invasive species and their impact on national parks. To begin the main reason for the speech, let's head all the way back to the mid 19th century for a quick look at how it all started. In 1832, there was an artist called George Catlin, and he was accredited to having the first idea of making national parks in the U.S. In 1861, 29 years later, Congress appointed Ferdinand Hayden to head of the government's new geological survey. One of the areas he surveyed was in between the Montana and Wyoming territories called the Yellowstone region. The first established park was Yellowstone in 1872. It was created because Hayden advocated often about the Yellowstone region being set aside as a park after seeing its beauty. So, on March 1st of 1872, President Grant signed the bill setting aside 2.2 million acres as a public park. The earliest and biggest policies of the time were the Forest Reserve Act of 1891, allowing presidents to reserve certain forests and make them into national forests. The other was the Antiquity Act of 1906. The Antiquity Act created tools for the president to protect sites of historic significance as national monuments so that people wouldn't collect and sell the artifacts there instead. But there was a problem. The act had lacked of clarity whether national monuments could be modified, and location was also a problem. Some areas were controlled by the Department of Agriculture, while others were controlled by the Department of the Interior. They didn't know whether to do if the area chosen was in multiple department areas. Now that you know how this all started and some of the issues that came along with it, let's move a little bit further through time into the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a critical time for unemployment, and the MPS was no different. The CCC, or Civilian Conservation Corps, was made by Franklin Roosevelt when he took office. It was meant to replenish natural resources and provide jobs for thousands of men. Their work consisted of building roads, housing, and visitor centers, while also protecting habitats and planting millions of trees. Post-World War II, visitation to the national parks skyrocketed, but the conditions were poor from decades of pushing off maintenance because of more important events like the two World Wars. In 1956, Conrad Worth, the director of the National Park Service from 1951 to 1964, proposed Mission 66, which was a plan that would take 10 years and about $1 billion to completely rebuild the infrastructure of the national parks. During the 1990s and 2000s, the National Park Service continued to add more parks, this time trying to highlight the more dark and challenging times of our history. One of them being Little Big Horn Battlefield National Monument. The National Park Service's 75th anniversary was in 1991, where they sponsored a symposium being a meeting or conference where the participants form an audience and make presentations. They did this in Vail, Colorado to create an idea for future success. In 2000, the MPS rewrote their agency mission, now stating the validity of outdoor recreation and adding inspiration and education to go along with enjoyment. In the 2010s, they created more policies regarding climate change and cultural resources, while also creating many virtual land surveys. Some of the current news right now is President Donald Trump is planning to defund and destroy the National Park Service. They are trying to cut more than $1 billion from the National Park Service, which would be the largest budget cut in over 100 years. The Trump administration has already started to cut National Park Service grants that were protecting the safety and health of the national parks and the public. Continuing the topic of negatively affecting the national parks, let's talk about something on a bit of a smaller scale, that being the impact of invasive species. Invasive species are organisms that are not native to the habitat they are currently in, while causing extreme harm to the ecosystem, the native organisms, and biodiversity. Because of the harm they cause, invasive species can also cause harm to human health and even the economy by decreasing grazing capacity for livestock, spreading new diseases or diseases the population is not prepared for. They can also block intake pipes for power generation and water treatment facilities, which is what zebra mussels do. There are a wide range of ways invasive species destroy ecosystems and threaten biodiversity. They can displace native species, interfere with ecological processes such as the food chain, and transmit diseases to the native species that aren't built to withstand them. One of the biggest threats to biodiversity is actually the domestic house cat. When they are feral or free range, they outcompete the native medium-sized predators such as foxes and raccoons, leading them to become dumpster divers. The domestic cat has also performed a total extinction of some species on islands. I bet you're wondering how to help stop the spread of invasive species and fix the ecosystem. Although we technically can't fix the ecosystem, there are some things we can do to prevent further damage. Specific to water organisms like fish and mussels, you can prevent the spread by remembering to clean, drain, and dry your watercraft after leaving the water, and familiarize yourself with the non-native species that frequent your area so you can alert your local government if you see an invasive species in the water. For the land organisms such as fungi, mammals, and plants, it's much harder since they're not confined to one pond or lake. Never release pets or exotic animals into the wild. Always clean your equipment before you leave, and plant native trees and shrubs. I believe that I have now done my best to teach the audience about the history of the national parks, its system, and the invasive species that try every day to invade and destroy the environment that is so important to our country. Now that you know that despite being overshadowed by more popular histories, the United States national parks have a rich history that will add another piece of the puzzle to learning American history. You have also learned how to protect against and prevent invasive species in your everyday life. Now you know why those signs against zebra mussels are there and how to protect your national parks too.